Okay, so I am a licensed psychologist, and that, started actually with studying scripture. I have a bachelor's in biblical studies, and when I did that, it was not because I knew at all what God had planned. I just loved the Bible. I remember debating my pastor at age 13 and frustrated with something, asking my dad questions, and he said, go research it yourself. And that kind of started a passion of just reading my Bible, understanding what God had to say for me. So I started with that passion, and then, how God works, ended up not planning, but in a master's degree for counseling psychology, where a lot of my strengths and passions came together in a profession. Eventually getting my doctorate, and all the way up to today, do a lot of presentations for churches. We have a university training therapists from a biblical worldview. So to me, understanding humans, understanding children, parenting, all of this from a biblical worldview makes sense. Why would we not take advantage of that? So as a professional, I believe, the cutting edge experience, because I can have so much truth that I bring to everything. I am a mom. I've been married 20 years and have 2 kids. I wish all of my education helped, but in some ways it doesn't. All it does is give me a big, long list of really bad things not to do. Okay, I know I can't do that. Okay, that's, off the table. But everything you have in head knowledge, as soon as that kid's there, it just disappears, So in a lot of ways, as a parent, I'm exactly where everybody's at. I will give you some of the things that came basically out of understanding how the brain works, and I'll tell you why I went that direction for today's presentation. But I'm still exploring and adjusting every day. My children do something that wasn't in any textbook. So I'm excited to be here with you and would glean from others just as much as I hope you get something from this presentation. I went in the direction of, I don't know if the PowerPoints will get up there, but I went in the direction of focusing on how children learn in the aspect of brain development, because we're going to have a lot of stress happening currently in where we're at today. We had that anyways. As a parent, it's all there. It's just adjusted a bit. But I think there's a lot of fears we have coming to this, and so we have a list of things that are really important in our minds. And when I became a parent, that's one thing I thought I could take advantage of. I know brain science. I understand the brain and how it works in child development, so let's go see what's really important and what's not, especially because I had a good friend who had a daughter who memorized all of the countries when she was like 3, and I thought, oh no, I'm a failure. What happened? How did this happen? What did I do wrong? So in studying brain science, it really helped me okay, there's a lot of really important things you can do. Some of it does not matter. It's just not going to make a difference, so we don't have to stress about it. So that's helpful. I also have a lot of experience on the adult side after parents have not done the job they need to do. So we won't talk about that today, but it can come up in discussion, because there's a lot of research on brain development with children that look at stress and trauma, and that's just basically a good way to have the brain development of your child just completely changed. And sometimes we bring that stress and trauma in, and sometimes life does. So we can have that at the end too, if that's something that's valuable to you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to look at 5 areas. These are kind of the gold. These are the big things. If you have down, which will likely come natural to you, you're going to be fine. Everything else comes with time. It just comes naturally in a lot of ways. So we're going to look at attachment and independence. We're going to look at modeling, creativity, curiosity, play, and communication. I'd like to see kind of ranges. I see a ton of little teeny tiny babies, which is fantastic. But what kind of age ranges do you have at home besides who you have here? So if people just have really young kids only, where it's like infant, early years, 1 to 3-year-olds, raise your hand. Just like real little ones. Great. You have the most hope. You're probably done fine already, but Okay, what about ages like 4, 5, 6, early elementary, kind of still young? Okay, a good amount there. Anybody kind of have older kids where they may be getting into early teen years and on up? Okay, we got a couple of those. Very good. So one thing about learning is sometimes you learn things and you go, oh, wish I would have known that 10 years ago. So if something like that happens, it's okay. Just don't even stress. There are always consequences for our past, that's true. But when we're talking about brain development, it's called plastic. The brain is seen as adjusting, molding, doing new things. It's amazing. So whatever has happened in the past that might be discouraging when it comes to how the brain's developed, it actually is more likely than not everything can be repaired. And I'll give you a freebie right at the beginning. One way to improve any damage to child brain development from stress or other kind of trauma things that have happened, number one to repair it is healthy relationships. It basically mimics things that you get when you're a kid, which we'll talk about today. So healthy relationships actually just re-hardwires the whole brain. It's fascinating. So there's hope. So let's dive in here. We'll go to, I've got 2 screens here, but we'll go to the first, attachment and independence. So one thing to know is that kids flourish when they feel safe and have their needs met. In child development, looking at brain development, the first 6 years of life, actually in the womb as well, and then right when they're born, how kids learn by brain development concepts is experience through the senses. Whatever they see, touch, feel, hear, taste, everything that comes in to their senses is stored, and it's building the hardwire of how to interpret the world. So they learn by, you've seen something and you call and it goes into a memory. They store everything. Every single thing they ever experience is being retained in their little tiny brain. Their brains work much more than ours when they're very young. Every single thing they experience. And about age 6, not right at that time, but about age 6, there's a pruning process. Whatever has been consistent remains. Whatever is not so consistent is pruned off, tossed away. Now you have the hardwiring of the brain that the kid will use to interpret the rest of his life or her life on. So any kind of patterns that they get in those early years, they figure that's going to happen later on in life. And we know this as adults. We can look back and we see how we were as a child. If you did not have a stable home and a lot of terrible things happen, you have a message that why even try? It's probably not going to work out. I don't deserve good things. I'm never going to be able to keep what I love. We have these deep messages inside. That's early brain development. If you have a good stable home, a lot of difficulty may come. You think, I'll figure this out. Let's do this. Let's conquer life. I'm going to go out and persevere. And that's deep inside a person from very early on. So ages 0 to 6 are some of the most important years because it would give them the easiest, best chance. You can always come back and teach things later, and we'll talk about that for hope. But if you, for lack of a better word, go with me here on this, just brainwash kids, in the first 6 years with whatever you care about or what you think will improve their life or give them a fighting chance in the world we live in, all those things will come natural later. If they don't get it and they want to learn tools later, that's fine. They're perfectly capable of it. It just won't be as natural, if that makes sense. So, attachment. We all have a lot of studies on this with how kids attach, and basically how you develop attachment is meeting kids' needs they'll call it responsivity, but right away, and matching the need. So all the little babies here, you know exactly what you need to do. If they're hungry, you feed them. If they have a poopy diaper, you change it. And so in some ways, parenting is so simple, and yet not everybody fulfills this, even these simple ways. So in the early years, it's just matching needs. Do they need a hug? You're giving them a hug. Touch, affection, all of these things are really important in the early years. And if they have that, they are ready to explore and conquer anything. So one thing about education and how kids learn later, and when can they learn to read, and when can they where are they at in their math, and do they know their ABCs? So much of it, when you look at research on academic gains, has nothing to do with what they're academically learning in the early years. It has to do with how they feel as a person and their attachment with their family. If they feel stable and secure, they'll learn what we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's not like you can say, oh, well, he's 5, he should know this. He's 6. You all know, if you have kids, every kid's different. Every kid learns different. You're different. Your life's different. If you had, somebody that hadn't learned to read yet, unless there's a disability, which these things happen, bet you he will. Not as fast as you want, but then he'll learn. If he loves it, if he feels good about himself still, whenever he figures out how to learn, he'll read forever and everything will be fine. And anything he missed in 2 years, he could catch up real fast because he's gained that ability, that tool, and he'll go with it. So much of what we stress about in the early years actually does not make a difference when it comes to academic gains, and yet we're so worried we're behind sometimes. So attachment, if you had a kid with a secured attachment, traditionally, there may be some odd things because every personality is different, but traditionally that kid would love to be with you and fine if you're not there. Now, of course, this is age appropriate, so you're watching as kids grow, but in a traditional sense, you meet their needs, you love them, you hug them, you feed them, all these things are there. They feel good about who they are in this world. They know you're there for them. They're going to have what they need. That security, that sense of security and attachment allows them to explore. So if you had maybe very young 2, 3-year-olds, they might be right there. They want to be with you. They're excited to be with you, but then they just wander off and go play with the toys. That's a good sign. Somebody that has a kid clinging too much, there's many reasons why kids cling, so you can't judge a mom like, oh, clingy kid, Yeah, well, what if they lost their special toy yesterday and they're sad about it? So kids do things for lots of reasons. So overly, broad picture, if they will not leave that caregiver no matter what, it could be a sign that they feel insecure. And you may not have even specifically done anything. Kids are complex, so there's lots of reasons these things happen. But if they're secure, you'll watch them explore. And that's exactly what you want for brain development, for learning. If they are curious and excited and explore the world all by themselves, just little by little, probably everything's going to be fine. So I want to demystify some things as well. So independence is also important, and you'll know this as a parent, and you'll have to judge this depending on your kid. But bottom line is, very early on even, there might be something that kid can do by themselves, and you let them. Even though it takes a half an hour or you have a destroyed kitchen by the time they're done, you allow them to do something, and they start separating with, I'm my mom, I am her, there's no two people, to I am a separate person, and you'll hear the language, I'll do it by myself, but this is natural, this is good. You want them to feel like they can leave you and try something. And then later, it doesn't matter what that is. Are they trying to learn an instrument? Are they trying to do math? Whatever it is, they have this sense of, I'm going to go try it. Mom's right there. I'm going to go try it. I'm saying moms because you're all moms, but dads, all this stuff goes for them as well. Well, I might throw in a little bit of how extra valuable they are in one particular place. Very valuable altogether, but there's one they do a great job at, especially. So, independence. So throughout the time, age appropriate, you're thinking how they can be safe in boundaries. We'll talk about that, as well as explore and have freedom. And you could just make it up. You can come up with something. If you give them the experience that they do something and then they were able to accomplish it, and it appears that they did it without you, it's fantastic. That will build in themselves something for the future that they'll use. And then responsibility. So some of you do have older kids, becomes more important as they get into the teen years. It's not just that they get to do something on their own, but they're responsible and there's consequences if it doesn't happen. So if you protect them from all of their consequences and they don't feel that sense of responsibility, then that can slow down the process of them in their maturity growth. So, of course, with limits and age appropriateness, you're judging, okay, is this safe? You don't want them in physical danger. You don't want them in over their head, but you're thinking, what can they handle? Let's give them a little bit. And that sense of entrepreneurship to life will benefit them in all ways, even academics. Attachment comes from responsivity, which is this fancy term they'll use in child development of just like, there's a need, I meet it appropriately, okay? And then boundaries. So boundaries is what gives a child a sense of safety. So if you say something, you stick to it. This is not allowed. This is allowed. A million times you're saying the same thing sometimes. But that consistency, they may push that boundary every day. Here they come again and again. And yet if they feel that they're not going to win, it actually calms them down. They feel safer. Now they're ready to explore within the realm you give them. Now they can explore and be creative and move on in their growth. So I put structure with flexibility. This is important because we can overstructure our lives and it will suck the life and the exploration out of kids. Sometimes it helps us because it's hard to figure out how to do everything in a day. So we're structured. But if you have only structure, it actually may backfire. We need creativity. We need exploration. We need boredom, and we'll talk about this. That will give you your best gains in healthy development and learning, okay? So structure with flexibility. What that may be is maybe they always know this is how we wake up, this is how we go to bed. This is what happens on this time and this time. So there's these set things they can pretty much count on. And what helps is no matter what the day brings, they know at 2 o'clock this happens. Whew, everything's fine. And so that may not always happen. So then there's flexibility. And we'll talk about some strategies, but you could talk out loud. Oh, man, we always do this, and we can't do it today. That's okay. Maybe tomorrow. So you're talking out loud to help them understand how to deal with something when it shifts. But if you can have this structure in place, whatever it is, you get to pick it, but it's consistent, and they always can count on it. And then flexibility, where you just throw all the rules out the door and do something just for fun, and then they watch you do that, and they understand. The structure's there for safety. It allows them to feel comfortable and attached to you, and then the flexibility in how you handle it gives them ability to not be rigid, which will benefit them long-term in their development. Any questions on this one? We've got 5 we're going to go through, so we can spend a little time if it's something that's a little bit more important to you, or if something is a question that pops up. I don't mind bringing it in. You might have to scream it out, but anything coming so far? Okay, we'll keep going, but yell at me if you want me to stop. Modeling. Okay. They will be who you are every single time. Okay? Just go to a 4-year-old preschool and you know. I'll never forget, I was the director of Cubbies when I was like 16, and this 4-year-old's just screaming at all the other kids, you better get in line right now, you better line up, I told you. She's just yelling and pointing her finger. I'm like, oh goodness. And my children have definitely let my communication styles seep out to others. So yeah, it happens. But this is deep. Because do you want your kids to know how to handle stress? You have to handle it. Do you want them to be, do you want, if you have a son, for him to be a man of God and a faith and all this? Whoever his role model in that area has to be that. Not that moms can't have that influence and dads on both sides, but they will be whoever you are. And traditionally, in a big sense, they'll identify with the same-sex parent in certain aspects. We'll kind of look at both of that as we go along. So they will be whoever you are. So notice even if a kid's throwing a fit, what's going on and how are you feeling and what's going on in your mind and in your day. Sometimes our stresses seep out, and there they are experiencing them right with us. So it could be like a mirror to our own selves to say, hey, how am I doing? Did I have my time with God this morning to be in a good spot, to have peace? Where am I? Who do I got to go to or talk to get more help in this area? And you can even see your idiosyncrasies of your children as they grow. My son is really, really intelligent, which backfires on other areas. And so sometimes it's really stressful. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to go out and get extra help and think, okay, how am I going to teach him to handle, for example, being diligent and pushing through hard work and creating those environments. And I've got to be able to do it if I want him to do it. And so you're problem solving these things to figure out how they're picking up from what you're giving them. Speak out loud as you handle life. I think a lot of times naturally as parents, we want to keep our kids from the stresses. And there's age-appropriate times that's good. You don't need to bring in things that are not appropriate at a certain age. But in a general sense, life's happening. It's coming to them. It will come. So if they're in the middle of it and you can talk out loud, let's say somebody passes away and there's death. Yeah, this is so sad. I miss this person. I'm glad he had a relationship with the Lord and he's in heaven. And you just talk out loud. Whatever you want them to think, believe, know how they're going to experience life, you talk out loud about what you're doing. And just have this running dialogue. This was a terrible day at work. It was so stressful. I just felt really stressed, so I went outside. I took a deep breath. I feel a little bit better. You guys want to pray real quick? Let's just calm down and pray. You just talk out loud. Bring them into life experiences. You could tell them later, if you're stressed, do this tool. And they will not listen to anything you have to say. If you use these tools, they will pick it up by osmosis. It's not difficult. They'll have it naturally. It's a better way of learning. And then, I don't know if in what you thought the presentation would be matches as far as academics, but we'll tie it in as we go. But bottom line is, it is not difficult for the most time for kids to learn. It's the environment, the motivation, the kind of passion, creativity, these types of things. So instead of focusing on a list of things, if you create the environment, they will just do it naturally and love it and enjoy it. Not always. We'll talk about that too, but give them the best chance at it. Bring them into your spiritual practices if you want these tools for them. Whatever you have that you want them, bring them in. Talk about it. Have them pray with you. Open the Bible. Read the Bible with them. Anything you layer in, especially in the early years, it's so easy for them to have that pattern. So think of your pattern and how you trained yourself to be good and diligent at being with God every day. If you have, it's still hard for me to figure out how to fit this in, and it's so important. If you train them young, it's easy, it's natural, it becomes a part of who they are. And patterns last. So it's twofold. What patterns do you want for them, and what patterns do you have that they're picking up by osmosis? So you're looking at yourself as well as you move through trying to decide how to parent them, okay? All right, anything on modeling? All right. This one is really important. Yes, go for it. What do you guys think? From what I just said, if you screw up and you lose your temper, which happens, what would your gut say is a good response? If you're trying to model. What I do is I tell her what I should have done. Yeah. Yeah, like, wow, I went overboard. I didn't mean to snap at you. This is really frustrating. Yeah, you just openly communicate because most people lose their temper at some point. And so how do they calm themselves back down? How do they restore the relationship? So do you lose your temper and hide and beat yourself up and feel guilt and I should have been a better parent? And then they feel like you're distant. They exploded at me and then I'm gone. And so they're gone. And so, there's a disconnect. So restoring the relationship's important, open communication, but you're still the mom, so you can also say, but you still need to clean your room, so figure it out. You can still have the boundary in distinguishing, but you are still responsible for what I told you to do 10 times, or you get a consequence. I went too far and exploded on you, and I shouldn't have done that. Sorry about that. However you phrase it, because people have weird things about different words, like sorry versus what. I don't care what words you use. The idea is bringing them into it and restoring the relationship and talking through what happened so they can process it. In all the research on kind of trauma that has negatively affect brain development with children that leads to a whole list of difficulties, it's not always a trauma. It's how the kid interpreted it. So in one of the studies that's used most, it looks at adverse childhood experiences. This was a huge study, over 17,000 people out of Kaiser, and they were studying health consequences of childhood, but what they found out was much more. So they looked at abuse, they looked at parents that had been divorced, parents that were alcoholic, parents that had gone to prison, all of these different negative experiences. And what they found is they were directly tied to not being able to get a job, to being in an addiction, to having a divorce themselves, to being in a domestic violence relationship, a big long list of difficulties. Later, we realized it's because of how the brain develops. And even when you look at kids in school with, maybe they have a lot of acting out behavior, their ADHD, which is a real thing, but a lot of people get that diagnosis because they have stuff going on at home. They can't concentrate, and all the acting out behavior is at school. So we see this kind of big pattern happening. Now we understand it. We know the effect all of these things happen. But the number 2 tied, there's a tie for number 2 of most common negative experiences in childhood. The tie was between a parent being an alcoholic and parents getting a divorce. Well, that was the finding, which was a big deal at the time to realize how it affects kids. Later on, one of the factors is not the divorce in and of itself, although there could always be negative consequences, but it's how the kid interpreted it. And I don't know how many times when I talk to somebody, okay, remember when you were a kid and that happened, what did you believe about yourself coming away from that situation? Almost every single time the kid says, it was my fault. And they have some weird reason for that because kids are concrete. I spilled the milk, it was gone, it's my fault. They connect weird things, but that's a huge factor, is that a lot of the negative experiences that really have difficulties for kids actually are how they interpret it, not the event itself. So if you are talking out loud, if you know what your kids are thinking and how they're interpreting things, you can correct it. And a lot of things might not impact them that if you missed it, it could. And you would not know it until they're 40 and they tell you, like, yes, you ruined my life when this happened. And you're like, I do not even remember that. So, having that open communication now is really important, and that'll be one of our points, because you can change the brain development by how they perceive the event. Okay. I think I answered your question on modeling. All right, creativity and curiosity. Fostering questioning and curiosity. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be fun. Okay. I literally bought Alexa because I thought maybe it could solve the problem of my son asking so many questions. And it did it because she doesn't know a lot. I need Google, I guess. She was like, we're sorry, we have no idea what you're asking. So this is something that can lead to intelligence, to the brain development that leads to intelligence. Now, I will say a good factor in intelligence in general is genetic. There is an aspect to that. At the same time, the potential of intelligence is not really capped. It's not that there are not learning disabilities and some things that would create barriers, but even in that person likely could always improve until the day they die. Always improve. The brain adjusts and molds, and it's just fascinating. So for anyone, they can actually increase their intelligence level and their way of conquering the world in that way. So if you want the most out of your kids' education, it's actually a lot of times in these factors, not in what they read. Just think of history, for example. If you just every year, first grade, second grade, third grade, every year they're learning history, it's almost 95%, they'll just forget because it's not how our brains learn, which is okay. We need layering, so it's not a negative to learn in layering, but we actually don't retain a ton of information that way. But if you created curiosity and passion and interest, and one day they're 14 and they just decide they're interested in history, they could read whatever books, they just dive in. They could learn more about history than you ever thought about learning. So I just want to flip the script a little bit on how education sometimes presents information and how an opportunity you have for them to go way beyond that because they want to and they're interested and it's natural and easy instead of I hate history. Let me read all this. You still have these set things they've got to learn, and that's what I always tell my kids. But you still need to know math. Sorry, after you're done with math, go explore in what you love. So there's still things you might keep in education, but I do want you to realize the most benefits are going to come from other areas, not just rote learning. So, foster questioning and curiosity. You question. I wonder how those light bulbs work. How does the electricity get and shine them? Isn't that odd? You ask questions. You give them this idea. They usually naturally have 1,000 questions, so you just foster it. That's true. I have no idea. I had a secret weapon because my husband happens to know everything. I don't know how. He's like one of those guys he knows how things work. I have no idea how things work. Other than the brain, it's the one thing I figured out. But I don't know how cars work. I don't know how things work. He does. So you may not have a person, always that has the answer. If you do, that's great too. Well, and they could describe something. Give them a piece of information. That's going in a part of the brain when they're very young. They'll be able to use all of that to piece the whole world together later. So question, answers. This is exhausting. There will be a day you just want them to go away. Nobody's allowed to say mom today, okay? And I was like, no one is allowed to say mom today. So it takes a strong parent to be able to use these concepts, but it's worth it. It will come back as a benefit to you. And we'll talk about this maybe at the end of being gracious with yourself. There's only so much you can do possibly in a day, but I still want you to see what's most important and what things probably are never going to give you the gains you think they will. So exposure to new experiences, how the brain develops. Remember, especially ages 0 to 6, but from then to the rest of your life. If you want to increase intelligence, get new experiences. You see something new. I remember the first time I went to Yosemite. I felt it as a life-changing experience. It literally, I came back and changed a lot of things in my life. It was a big deal for my husband and I. We sold our house. We started a business. It just changed us. But also biologically in our brain, physically, it changes your brain. That's something beautiful, huge, bigger than what you've ever seen. But anything that is new, an experience that's new, a touch that's new. When those little babies, all of the times when they're playing, all the different textures, the sights, the colors, everything new. But that continues on. Introduce some new idea. You can't do this forever, but just know this is important. This increases the type of brain development that leads to learning and holding information. Engage senses. And here's a special word for our society that I cringe. This is not my favorite phrase, but it's very true. Boredom is the precursor to creativity. This is hard in our society. We like everybody to be busy every second of the day. That does not help brain development. That does not help intelligence. That does not help much of anything that we're talking about valuable today. If you have boredom, first the kid's really irritated, They want to play video games. They want to, do something else. And so you have this, lashing out of all the world and how they hate everybody. But if you make it through that, then they sit and they're bored and they're kind of irritated. Then all of a sudden they look and they see something over there. And then they go grab it and they start playing with it. And then they maybe even go get their sister and they start playing. And then they go into some creative world somewhere, of all this exploration that they start in on. This is really important, and it's not our culture. But that fosters intelligence, that fosters healthy brain development. That where a kid goes in creativity is much more tied to intelligence than anything they're going to learn out of a textbook. It'll just come natural. So this is really important because you're going to have to fight for it. It's not going to come natural. It's going to make your job harder. But if you can allow it, it would be wonderful. Maybe you're even there with them. If you do, we'll talk about play next, but if you do, just remember, don't direct. If they're playing and they're in their own world and they're getting creative, you could be right there with them, but you follow their instructions in that time frame, or you'll mess up that creativity. They're being creative, so you can just be along for the ride and watch it. You will grow an amazing fascination for your kid, probably. Okay. Anybody cringe at trying to keep kids bored so they get more creative? It's stressful. Do we cringe? Like if we have 5 minutes, we're supposed to relax and take that time for ourselves, and we're twitching. That's me. I don't know about you, but I twitch. Okay. Play. I don't understand how we forgot how important play is in a society, in our educational system. You're here, Foothouse has a great program. In some of the traditional public schools, they have had discussions of taking out recess. Now we have COVID, and who knows what's going to happen. But there was a decreased emphasis on play. And yet, if you're going to do one thing to improve academics in a kid, is for them to play. So it's how they learn. How a child's brain is created is not meant to learn in our traditional sense of read this book, memorize this. It's not how the brain works. It's fine, and there can be benefits to it. For example, if a kid learned to read early, then they have many more years of reading. They could technically get more information. So there could be benefits, but it's not how the brain works. For example, even with reading, when the brain's ready to read, it's actually easy. If the brain's not ready to read, it is your worst nightmare. So sometimes we fight these battles, but why? Because somebody told us they should be reading by now, or because our friend's kid is reading, or I'm not saying you don't have to pursue and trust your gut on, pushing your kid forward in all this area, but I just want you to know it's not how the brain works. The brain, how the brain works in a child, they learn through play. They learn through communication with people. It doesn't mean talking. There's other types of communication. They learn by, all their experiences. Play in particular is important in healthy development of the brain, and it kind of shifts as they get older. So when they're little, they need to crawl, they need to walk, these types of things. And you know this, you're putting all kinds of things in front of them that they can play with. Playing with other people, seeing faces. A young kid seeing a face, that's important for development. And then as they grow, they need physical. They need to roll around, they need to climb, they need to fall, they need to run. All their large motor skills, they need to just be out there doing this. They need sunshine, they need different textures, grass, all of these things. This is what would foster healthy brain development in a kid. And yet it's not popular in our culture anymore. It's so hard. I know there's a lot of negatives that come from COVID, but my sister moved right next to me, and she's got 5 kids, and right before COVID, so when COVID hit, the kids are trapped, but with their cousins, and we live in a place where there's a lot of land. We could have done this always. I don't know, it's funny what what it takes to wake you up sometimes. But all of a sudden, I'm looking out, and there's about 7 kids on bikes lined up. And I just thought, wow, this is what life's supposed to be. It is, and we had that. There were times where we had that. You go out and play, and you don't come home until it's dark. That actually fosters healthy brain development, but it's not as common for many reasons in our society. Possibly with all this happening, that will be a benefit, is that kids have to figure out how to play, or they're going to go crazy. So the play is important. So physical play, peer play. Therapists use this all the time. When therapists do therapy with children, all they do is set up playthings, and the kid plays out whatever's going on in their life. They just play it out. Well, kids do this all the time anyways, naturally. So with peers, somebody's a mom, somebody's a dad, somebody's the bad guy, somebody's a good guy. They play, they put on characters and try it out. They try this, they reenact things. And this is how they learn how they're going to overcome something. And so they have to figure out how to get along with their peers. And, you're developing in ways in your brain that's going to be adult life later. So you're layering this in. Imaginary play, too. And imaginary play, you go however far you want to. Anytime a kid spends in this area, they're discovering life in a whole new way. And what it does in the brain and fostering brain development, it actually lays the ground for any type of learning that will come later. It's basically opening that opportunity for them to learn whatever else comes. Whether it's math or reading or anything, it's laying the brain development for that. At least those first years, very important. And actually, peer play, obviously goes up, but like elementary age time frame, it's just very important. I don't know what we're going to do, right now with where we're at, that people are uncomfortable with kids playing, but I don't know the full ramification of COVID on health in our society. I absolutely know the effect that it will take on our kids if they don't play. So that's an interesting dynamic, is how do we figure this out in this time frame in history? But imaginary play, you play out your roles. Anything on play? What do you guys think? Have you figured this out? This is difficult in our society, especially right now, and yet top of the list, anybody that understands child development, brain development, learning for kids, they're going to remind you play is so important. Are we figuring it out? Do you have any questions about this? Yes?
This might go back to attachment, the independence they give exploring. I have a couple of boys, and they're so wild. They want to do things, and I find myself saying, I wish your dad was here because I don't want you to do this, and I think dad would let you do it. Like climbing trees, and how high are they going to go? So when it comes to play and giving my boys independence, maybe just like in your family, how do you balance that? Like letting kids be wild and playing, but also safe and like not hovering over them as they're playing?
It's a great question. There's a lot to this question that has to be individualized to your family. I definitely know my kids are more safe with my husband. He has stories he tells of me, I won't say, but I don't have fast reaction times. If they're falling, I will kick them on accident, when I'm trying to help them. So he tells the story, he tells it differently than I remember, but the one part we agree on is that he randomly came home from lunch, and my son was about ready to crawl off a stair. He ran and leaped, and my son's head landed in his hand right when he was there. Now, the lead up to that story is different, in my opinion, than his opinion, but his reaction time is amazing. So that is a benefit, and I don't know what time your husband has, because my kids play differently with my husband than me, and that's actually in research. Fascinating. So I'll give this to you right now, and then we'll come back more to that question. In child development, it's seen that a person gets their identity of who they are as a man and a woman from their dad. Now, you could imagine how difficult that is in our society right now. We've struggled in this area. So one reason or one aspect that comes out of that is actually with the dad and how they play. Now, of course, we know everybody's different, but traditionally, the dad does not let the kid win, and they play rough, you know? And to this day, if my daughter ever hears this, she will be so upset because she's 11. I still let her win sometimes. And my husband will never. She has to earn it. But what that means is there's frustration, there's anger, there's tantrums, all this that comes. And in the end, the kid has to pull it together. They lost. It creates emotional regulation in kids. The play with dads is tied to emotional regulation in children. I think that's fascinating. So it reminds us how important that is, and that might not always be accessible, so you might have to get creative with what that's going to be like. But there is a difference, and both are really important. How a mom fosters that with a kid and how a dad fosters that, both are really important. But with play, you are deciding every day, and you might get this wrong. First of all, what's the parameter? This is in discipline. This is what's allowed and not allowed. This is with play, whether it's too dangerous or not. You have this boundary in place of what you're setting. This is what you can do. This is going too far. And you do this forever, right? Till they're even teens. This is what you could do, too far. And you're creating these boundaries, and you're stretching them and stretching them and stretching them as they get older, doing the best you can to figure this out. Within that realm, they need that freedom. And so I imagine there'd be some kind of a boundary where you go, this is dangerous, and I know I can't do a good job protecting them. It's not going to be on my watch, and you wait, and you let dad deal with it later. And he may be better at judging. No, you're right. This is really not safe. And then you also he may say, yeah, what are you talking about? It's fine. And trust that. I have a story of one of my mentors years ago. I remember her telling a story of her sons, and she was a single mom, and she's standing there with these two boys, and one of them gets to the top of this very dangerous, it's like poles or something, but they're all stacked up, but not in a safe way, and she turns around, he's at the top of this, and he goes, "Look, Mom, I made it all the way to the top." And she's thinking, get off now. That is so dangerous. It's going to come rolling down at any moment. And she's trying to hold that reaction back to say, wow, honey, that's amazing. Okay, come on down. So you may have to navigate this where they need that sense of accomplishment and danger, and boys especially. And you're going to find some girls that are right there with the boy, like, oh yeah, I'll take it to the next level too. But that sense of accomplishment and pride is just so important. If you crush it too many times, that can make an impact. So you just do the best you can with what you're comfortable with, and talk to, if you have a husband, if you have a significant other, talk to them and see where this balance is going to come from. But it's gonna have to be so different for and the kids. Like my sister, she's got 5, so it's funny how she did parenting different with all of them, because she would never let this one climb, but this one, yeah. Because this one's more balanced. This one, she knows all their different strengths. So this one's not allowed to barely walk by themselves because they'll just trip and fall every time. This one can climb mountains. He's fine. Because it's just how she feels, her gut sense of safety with all of them. And you might get this wrong, but you're doing your due diligence to try to get it right. Okay? But the dad playing, I do think that's important. If you don't have that, I don't know if you have other people in your life you can bring in just to give your kids a hard time, to build in emotional regulation. Don't tell my dad that, because he thinks that's his job on earth, is, to give kids a hard time so they get stronger. So he doesn't need to know this. Okay. Culture of communication. This resonated with me years ago. I stole it from somebody. But they said, no matter what, if you develop a culture of communication in your family, you can almost handle anything that comes because you'll know about it. And looking at adults I work with and their childhood and where they come from, that's a lot of the damage is when something happened nobody knew about. And it doesn't even have to be severe abuse or trauma like happens. It is there. But it could also be an adult said something that just got to the kid. And they felt uncomfortable or they felt something. I'll never forget my 4th grade teacher. I just still have bitterness. And so how she talked to me, how she treated me, it just was awful. And I felt like, I remember I got a message, I'm not creative, never try anything creative. Well, that's terrible. To this day, I won't be creative. It's in my brain, even though I know logically that doesn't make sense. I should heal. And I've even done a couple things to test it out. But the point is, that really affected me. And these things happen to kids. Do you know about it? If you know about it, can you talk it out? Oh my gosh, that's terrible. And do you have their back? Or are you telling them, well, what'd you do to make the teacher upset at you? Which sometimes that's appropriate. They are, troublemakers. But you're trying to hear them, listen to them, and figure it out. And that's actually the bottom line, is listen. Kids are fascinating in how they communicate. If you pause, something might come. And this doesn't always come natural to us. So creating opportunities for that. I remember to this day, my mom would always say, what is it about midnight? This is for older kids. But she's like, what is it about midnight? It's always my best conversation with my kids is at midnight. But even my son, he's 12, almost 13, and I already see that. It's at night. Everybody else is going to sleep, and he wants to talk. And here he comes with his deep thoughts and his day, whatever happened in the day and worries and all that. So each kid's different, and as they grow, it'll be different times. But listen. I remember a story from my husband. He used to work with preschool. I think they were like toddlers even, 2 or 3 years old. And one particular day, when the parents were picking him up from church, he goes, oh, your son was telling me all about some show. And the parent goes, my son doesn't talk. And then my husband just looked at him and said, yes, he does. And he came home just like hurt. How does this parent not know that their kid talks? It just broke his heart. It's stuck in his brain. He tells this story. It still gets him emotional. They're busy, they're not listening. I don't know what's going on, but they missed that their kid talks and just had this whole conversation with my husband about a show. Hard to understand, but absolutely communicating. So we've got to remember to listen, to pay attention. And with listening also, it's sometimes not the words, but how did they feel in the situation? And bringing that out of them and helping them process it. So if they felt a certain way, you're coming back to say, I felt like that before. Whatever you need to do to help them frame it, to make sense of it, that's going to be the healing part for them. If it gets stuck and they can't make sense of it, it rolls around in the brain different in ways that could be considered what we'll call small t trauma. So they get messages you don't need them to have from these small t traumas that we can have a lot of influence over. Okay. The middle one, actually, this is fantastic. I use this for so many things. Non-reactive responses and a game face. Now, it's okay to be authentic with your kids and have reactions, but there's some times that this is my list. I didn't do this for today, but I can if we have time. But this is my list over here is what not to do. How you could really scar your child for life. There's that list as well. One of them is shame and guilt. That something happens and you just go off on them. You should have never, I can't believe you would do such a thing. Why did you do it? Now, this may be an honest reaction, and I'm not saying I've never done it, okay? But when you pour shame and guilt, like, I am such a bad child, deep inside, especially if there's no restoration later, that's deep. That will sit with that kid, and maybe you even have experiences from your own childhood where it sits, and you get a message about yourself that just doesn't go away. So in that way, some reactions that are just natural are going to create shame in a kid, but they're just natural. What are you supposed to do? Something happened and you freak out, but it could backfire. And so I give this tool, this game face, to you for these moments. So you might have to practice it in other settings, but basically if something shocking comes to you, you don't react, you take deep breaths. In your brain, you're like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? But on your face, oh, interesting. Now, as a therapist, I had to have this, right? Nobody wants to say their deep, dark secrets, and I go, that's not what anybody needs, So it's a tool that every counselor is supposed to have, but everybody could learn this. So if there's a moment you need it, where whatever they say, instead of having the shocked response, just go, oh, wow, that must have been scary. Oh, interesting. You just calmly start talking. What that does, first of all, they'll go, whew, because if they're telling you something that you may be shocked about, they might have been scared to death to say it. If you respond well, that fosters that communication. They're going to be okay saying anything and everything to you later. My kids are old enough where, they understand basic concepts about topics that you've got to get to later in life. But I don't even know fully what they know. We keep this open dialogue, but sometimes they'll grab words. I don't know if they know what they mean and throw them out there. And I'm just like, what are we talking about? Oh, interesting. So what do you mean by that? And then I get their version of it. It's like, oh, shoot. To not overreact allows them to feel safe telling you anything, as well as it could protect you if you could have accidentally put shame on them. Ooh, gross, disgusting, shocking, why could you, how could you? That could backfire. And so it will protect you from that, to have that game face. So these are kind of the big ones. I can go on forever on some of this stuff, but I'm going to open it up and we'll see where we go. I'll give you some ideas too. The point of all this is, if you have all kinds of goals for your kids in academics and you want them to learn and you want them to score certain scores or meet their, meet their standards throughout, they probably can do that very naturally, very easily, given the right environment. There's a lot of other difficulties that come in the way. What curriculum are you picking? Do they enjoy it? They get bored easily. What activities do we have? Various things that come along. But I just want you to know what's most important. And can you see that this would come natural? Everything I shared, does it feel comfortable, like you could do this naturally, just as a mom? What do you guys think? Is it feel like you can foster creativity, that you can listen, that you can create experiences that bring out new activities in their day? And is all this resonating as just natural? Yeah? You're like, I am sleepy and need some coffee. I do too. Okay. That I hope it does, because what comes natural to you a lot of times, your gut is probably right. It's a lot of times when we get other people outside, our competitors, different, that kind of lead us into ways that may not help. It's not that they're negative, it's just they're not as important. So if you can hone in on these, I don't care what curriculum you pick, I don't care, it'll happen. And one thing that will get in the way of all of that is stress. So if you can figure out how to manage your stress levels, you've got the whole world open to you. If you get stressed, and probably all of you know this to some extent, especially in today's age with everything happening, stress a lot of times brings overwhelmness that just sticks you in a deep hole. And then you're not connecting with your kid. You can't even have a conversation. You might be snapping at him because of this. So if nothing else, I hope you release the stress and worry of, am I going to do everything great in my academic, path with my kid? Just unhook yourself. Focus on the relationship, the attachment, their development, and that way, all of that will come naturally. You'll do a great job, and you'll figure out how to problem solve whatever difficulties come along the way. Okay, so let's open it up a bit. I'd like you to think of questions you have, but remember, I can come in other things. For example, usually I'm talking about the negative side of it, how trauma affects children's development. Domestic violence, abuse, some of these things. So I've got all that background if you want to bring in any questions on that. We can talk about more academics, like interest in music creates the part of the brain that prepares for science, so there's some interesting things there. We can talk about How do you build consistency? How do you build boundaries, discipline? I can open it up now to maybe something that's more focused on what could help you the best. And you can ask questions on what I did share as well. Yes. Sure. It's a great question. Yeah. I'll answer it in two ways. One, children rise to expectations and they flourish in them. So, in a general sense, high expectations is a value to child development. Really does. This is a separate topic, but interesting. In social psychology, they study all this stuff, often. And one study that was really popular was they would tell parents or tell teachers who's gifted in a class, and then at the end of the year they come see, and those children that said they were gifted to the teacher, they had significantly higher scores, but they just picked them randomly. They were not gifted. But how the teacher expected more from them and treated them actually increased their actual scores and everything. And you'll see this straight across the board. Kids rise to your expectation. So that's fantastic. But at what cost, I would say? Because play is really important. What are the expectations? To reach a certain grade? Well, how is that going to help them? Like if they're memorizing, dates in history, but they can't play with their friends, that's probably going to backfire on you. So what are your expectations? So it might be, you may want to do outcome-based instead, like your expectations of their behavior or your expectations of their, what they're actually doing. Like, if you can foster enjoyment out of something, then they're going to rise to the expectation and beyond because they love it. And so another thing that was on my mind in that too is having two sides. One is letting them have fun with what they really enjoy without boundaries. And then over here, maybe what they don't enjoy, but you have their standards. I need you to at least do this, at least do this, at least do this. Just because if they love something, let's say they're playing the keyboard and they just love it. If you get them lessons and they have to go at certain times and then they have expectations for how well they play, they'll probably lose the love for it. It'll backfire. So if they love something, they have interest in something, you might be less directive with that and just let them run with it. Give them what they want and need around that. Yeah. Sure. I think in some ways it's going to be individualistic. Now, I would always ask the question, at what cost? So, for example, is the one thing that's important to you, because learning an instrument at a young age is much easier than later on. Learning a language at a young age is much easier than later on, but at what cost? So that's what you're looking at. So if they don't enjoy it and you're forcing them, probably they will never play piano again once they have learned whatever you taught them, So how did that benefit in the long term? I'm not sure. Now, I will say I have a lot of adults that say, I wish my parent would have pushed me because, speaking another language, all these things that could benefit you later in life. Why didn't my parent push me so that I have this tool later? So I'm not saying that hasn't happened as well. But at what cost? Is it there's 10 of those things, so the whole day is done? Or do you pick what's important at the time? That's your standard. You have to do it. They're going to whine and complain no matter what, but everything's fine. Eventually, they may love it. Eventually, some of those instruments, that really does actually help with brain development and learning. So learning an instrument at a young age can improve brain development in a certain way that helps academics later. So that's there. So let's say you pick one and you stick to it. Then they still have all these other areas. It's probably fine. If everything's structured, everything has expectations, everything is like that, then it might backfire on you. Where do they find creativity? Where do they have enjoyment in? And it's hard because of personality. My lovely son, it's very rare there's going to be something up front he's excited about. He will think it's the end of the world, no matter what it is. So I have to make him every time. And then once he starts something, then he enjoys it. That's just his personality. So that would be different. My daughter, she's just ready for anything. So you're looking at the differences. If you have that child that doesn't seem to want to do anything and you push them and then they love it, you're going to push them more. If you have another one that seems naturally to just know what they love, you're probably going to let them go after what they love. You might still have some things important to you over here. You're the mom. That's okay. But you're letting a lot more freedom over here to do what they're passionate about, because that's going to turn into what they probably do for the rest of their life. That passion, what they seem to be natural at, you've got to have time over here on their weaknesses. That's important too, to strengthen those. But this is probably what they might run with for the rest of their life. So go for it. Does that help a little bit? What else? We can go off topic too. Whatever would be most valuable. Yes? Great question. So if you didn't hear it, do you share very honestly with your kid if you're sad? So there's two sides to that. Absolutely. And be careful what you put on their shoulders. Okay? So, for example, if you're having a bad day, and you're experiencing this, they already know. So, you know what I mean? They pick up on everything. So you might say, I'm very sad. And it's just very kind of logical statements. I'm very sad. Such and such happened. It just brings a lot of sadness to me. Today may be hard for me. I'm hoping I'll feel a little better by tomorrow. I probably need a hug. Let them hug you. Thank you. That helps just a little bit already. And you're talking it through. But if you're not careful, especially if you don't have a lot of social support, then you take your weight and you put it on your kid, and that's going to backfire. So that's something that I've seen a lot is, emotional difficulties, people going through a breakup or loss of a family member or something like that, and they bring their kid in fully to that emotional experience. Depending on their age, that may be beyond what they're capable of understanding or experiencing. So there's a difference in talking about something that you're experiencing and bringing your kid into the experience where they feel the weight of the sadness or the loss, or, they feel the experience you're having. So you could probably watch their body language and know a little bit about that. And if you're having a hard time and you even bring them into that a little bit, you might have purposeful times they can go play. They can have an outlet. What's really fun for them? Get them laughing and joking at something so that they're not there with you as you go through it. They may be there for a moment. Now you give them the ability to check out and go have fun and have that break as well. Because some people go through difficulty where you're not going to have a break. You are living through a difficult time. So how do you give your kid that break? That can be important. Does that help a little bit? Very good. We've got two more. I'll go here and then back there. Yes. Yes. You got to work hard at it. It's tricky. But we've done a few things. There's places out in the middle of nowhere that don't care what you're doing. So you could look for those. But it takes a lot of work. I'm like Googling, trying to figure out. We went camping at a campsite where there's nobody there. Now that I've used it, I could let you know what it is on the side, but we can't tell too many people. So you might get creative because there's just not a lot of resources. So finding a place to go where they can play. You might have, hopefully, friends that you're close enough where it's okay. I don't know. I have family, thank goodness. So next door, that's just saved us. So if you don't have that, it's just going to get difficult. It might be here, actually, if we just take 5 minutes where other people raise their hand, and what did you figure out? We're going to have to work as a team to figure out creative ideas. Go for it. That's great. I forgot to talk about scaffolding, but scaffolding is when you as a teacher or a parent build in something around the kid where they can do more than they could do only by themselves. This is not quite that, but it reminds me of that. She's giving them ideas that they can run with. So they're reading a book and she goes, "What if you were Peter and we had a sword and we're off?" And she starts their brains in that direction. Now they take it and run with it. Now they're putting on a cape and they're getting this and they're doing various things. So she's sparking them in creative ways to run with it. And anything in imaginary play, that's going to be awesome. You might go find boxes and create mazes. And so your home becomes, some kind of an imaginary place because there's not a lot of resources. What else have people found creative to get these outlets for kids to play? And honestly, the social play is important. That's probably going to be the hardest. What has anybody found has worked? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yes.
I have various age ranges, but my little two kids still take naps. We've been this for years, not since COVID, but it's quiet time when the little ones are napping. And the bigger kids, when they're not doing homeschool, they can pick a few things. And then when you have to be quiet for 2 hours and you think that room is full of toys, they find really creative ways to do things without being structured or prompted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've seen most of my kids create when they're by themselves and they're kind of looking into the room. I think that's
I've seen that often with kids, but it's uncomfortable at first. So test it out and see, So you create a lot. Hopefully they have things, toys, whatever. They have to be quiet. You leave them alone and see what happens. You have to leave them alone long enough where the breaking point happens and then they get creative and start exploring. Yeah, very good. Yes. Yeah, you're fine, just so you know. You'll get creative, and probably other people here have found things, and you'll network and figure out ways that you can teach her not out of a book. That age has a hard time with books, always. So within that, though, if you do all that we had said, once there'll be a day she's ready. And you won't stop her. She'll be fine. She'll figure it all out. She'll figure it all out fast. So you just do this layering and layering and layering. You come back later. She doesn't remember anything you taught her. You come back later. You do this. You do this. It doesn't have to be sit down in a book. There's colors all over. So you walk around talking about colors. And then you do a coloring page and you talk about colors. And how many 50 ways can you bring in colors in a day? And then tomorrow you switch to letters. But how many ways are you going to introduce it? While you're playing, while you're being creative. So I definitely think one value you have is all of each other. You know, what has anybody found that works? And you share it amongst each other, and great idea, and let me try that. But as long as you have a mindset, you're watching and you're interacting with her, all these types of things, and looking for opportunities, you'll be fine. Yeah. And just specific research would show on kind of preschool and very academic-based preschool, and then looking at them in first grade versus those that stayed home. I'm sure parents were teaching them as well, but it wasn't as structured or intensive. And then look at first grade. And academically, no difference whatsoever. And then emotionally and attachment-wise and just kind of stable, the ones that were at home. Because they had that. The earlier years, it's more important to be, in that stable environment. And then they go explore. So it's reverse of what we might think of. If a 4-year-old's getting socially acclimated, it's not as exciting. It's fine, but it's not what they need. They need that stability in the home. And then, it's fine either way. We all have creative ways we figure out how kids feel safe and comfortable and attached to us. So it could all work well, but you don't have to stress. That's one message I want to bring to you, is that you'll be fine. Everything's fine. Of course, I want you to work hard and do your best as a mom, but you're going to probably do that naturally. So then if you can just remind yourself, take a deep breath, probably everything's fine. I think it will benefit you. One more, and then I forgot I was going to come back over here as well. Were you giving ideas or a question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, I do think all ages it is important, but when they get to be about 7, it's highly important. They'll have those peer play interactions and start figuring out who they are, in a lot of ways, and their role in life and acting out. But really, you'll watch this with the younger ones as well, in different ways. It's like they play separately, but it's still important they're together. So they might not be playing with each other as much, but it's still valuable. So I think all of the years are valuable. You'll watch the little ones all of a sudden 3, they're like looking at each other like, okay, let's play, but they don't know how to do it, but it still works out. And then, they get better. So it's all valuable, but I would say 7. Hold on one second, if you don't mind. I'm going to come over here and then we'll come back. Yes. Sure. Yeah, great question. So she's got a friend with young kids, and they are at 2 homes going back and forth. So that's really hard because what's allowed at the other home you don't know fully, and so they might come back worse every time. One benefit is you can always create a certain environment where the behaviors are expected differently here, whether it's church, Sunday school, or whether it's school, or whether it's one home versus the other. Kids pick up fast, so there could be a way she creates an environment where no matter what happens anywhere else, as soon as they walk in her house, they know this is how they have to behave. Now, that's still a problem if they have the other house, teaching something else, but at least gives them an environment. And so your best bet on any of this is boundaries and consistency, absolutely, no matter what. So if you can have consequences to action, whatever it is. This is hard because they're a little bit young, so I'm going to give an answer, but I'll go back and talk about the younger ones. So that if this happens, this happens. If this happens, this happens. Now, early on, it's like training ground. All the energy you ever spend pouring into, if this happens, this happens. If this happens, this happens, will benefit you later, because then they're not fighting you as much later, because they know if this happens, this happens. If this happens, this happens. And the younger years, it's harder because that's not how their brain works. You can layer that all day long. They forgot again. So don't forget that, because I'll see parents so frustrated. I just told you, they forgot, and they're going to forget again. So with how the brain works, they need to be a little bit older before they actually retain that, and they know. But you can build in muscle memory rather than logical memory, where they know even in their body, if I do that, that happens. So you can still layer it in, it's still valuable. So what's hard is the amount of energy and attention and consistency it'll take at the beginning. But if she can spend a good length of time with that whatever the consequence is that matters to the kid, it happens every time, that eventually they gain this. And they might have an increase of negative behavior at first, and then it could die down and they do much better. The other side of that, though, especially because they're so young, is what need is not getting met. And if they have two homes, if there's been a lot of stuff that's a little bit chaotic, they may have fear, they may have anger, they may have a lot of stuff because of their environment that's seeping through this communication. So whether it's how do you create a stable, safe place where when they're here, they know everything's fine, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be safe, which would be layering, it would take time. Or maybe even reaching out for an outside professional. I am biased. I'm a therapist. So I think hey, give the kid a little bit of time with the therapist. Kids heal fast, different than parents. Adults take so long for them to trust you and help you, get help. Kids are fast. So given the right environment, it's possible that some kind of a therapist could help process some of the things they're going through, and then they'd be in a more stable place. But otherwise, creating the safety, boundaries, consistency. If we're going through our own stuff, then we are consistent half the time, then none of it matters. It just won't count. Yes? It just depends on the therapist. There's some pretty fascinating techniques they use out there, more based on brain development, that can help. So even the 2-year-old is possible. It would have to be a specialist that knows what they're doing, but 4 years old is fine. And there are specialty techniques that use how the brain works, but if they're not using that, then they're doing play therapy and they're acting out, and they're you might have a sandbox with bad guys and good guys, and then they're playing with them and they're talking about, and then you help them reach a different ending. There's various things that you do that give them empowerment, way of expression. And something powerful about kids, a lot of times, just basically once it makes sense, once it comes into their awareness, or they have some kind of a way to figure it out, it dies down. The power of it is lost. So it's a little different than adults that are more complicated in how the brain works. So it could make a difference. Otherwise, it's a therapist helping the parent, stay not stressed out, and then figuring out some other tools to try. Yeah. And yes. Okay, here and here, and then we'll see where we're at. don't know if I could give a percentage or a time frame fully on that with research, so I'll just give you an answer, but it wouldn't be something specifically based in research. So my gut would say, a couple times a week or something like that. But I also think everything's so individualized with your kid. So you'll watch one kid, 1 day a week, twice a week, they seem fine. This kid really wants friends, like you'll kind of notice the distinctions in your children, and then I would go with that. But there's a moment in time, more like 10, 11, where it just shifts and they just want their friends every second of the day, and that's normal and healthy and fine. You may not be able to make that happen, but you'll probably notice a shift where they just want to go be with their friends and they care less about being with you. It's still important that they're with you. You still got to figure that out, and they will want to be, but it'll be a natural shift where they just start going off, and wanting to play. So I would just listen, watch, notice what they ask for. Can I go to so-and-so's house? Can I play? Can I play? Can I play? Can I play? Are they wanting more, or are they, do they seem to be fine? Okay, here, and then we'll see what we have for time. Yeah. Mm.
So do you diffuse it during that time, or how do you talk to them afterwards and say, we're not going to do this, without saying, you're being bad or it's bad behavior? How can you, I don't know how to diffuse that situation, but because this only happens when he's with you. So trying to push their buttons is just trying to see what he can get away with.
He's trying to see what he can get away with.
Do I let him play it out and mess stuff up, or do I say, you need to stop this, we're not going to do this right now?
Well, sure. One thing is decide on your boundaries. Are you okay if he destroys a bunch of your property? Okay. All right. Yeah. So so you decide your boundary, and then, it's in your mind, think, I have to win. Now, what is that going to take? But if you lose, he will figure out how to, control your world in a lot of ways. Kids are so smart, and they just are waiting. And let's say you're really good on your boundaries and you do a great job for a couple months, and then you're weak one day. Oh, they'll feel it, like, oh, here we come. So how you're going to do that may take creativity. You might read books on various strategies for discipline, because timeouts could work, or, you could distract and have them do something positive that you want instead. And there's lots of strategies that you can come up with. But one thing you don't want to do is start off with a boundary and then give it up. They will eat you alive. Okay? So I probably separately I could give you books that would help on just like creative strategies to hold that line. But it is important to just not back down. And then I would spend time ahead of time. If he does this, this happens. And tell him, and do it every single time, and have rewards for other good behavior. But you set it up ahead of time. You spend however long and however much energy to have your system in place. Then you practice it with him. You could set stuff up on purpose. You could put something there that he's not supposed to touch, just so he touches it, just so you can go, remember I said you can't touch that, here's your consequence. So he's trained, that you can have these practice runs to just train him, like whatever the consequences, whatever you want, pour into that system, and then it's there for you when you need it. Okay, do we have time for one more? Did you have a question? Mm-hmm.
They go back into that state of mind when they teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
And because of physical changes in the body, is that true?
I could see why people would view it like that. I'm not connecting it specifically, but definitely there's a time like empathy develops eventually, and sometimes it takes a while. And you can talk out loud. Oh, he's hurt. Maybe he's sad. Maybe we should help him. Like you could talk out loud to kind of foster that. But at first, kids could care less. I wanted my toy, so I hit him what? They just don't connect the pain another person's feeling, and then eventually they start. Now, I just think in adolescence, it's not that they lost empathy. I think that they have so much chaos happening that it looks like they're self-centered because they're internal. So I don't think that they have a different view on how other people feel. Just as a silly example, but I'll never forget my brother fighting with my mom. And then when my mom left, he goes, I'm going to listen to her, but I will not let her see that. And I was just laughing because, he knows, he gets it, but he's not going to show that to her. And same thing with empathy. They might know that really hurt that person. It might even bother them, but maybe at the time they're not going to show it for other reasons. So because of all that's happening with hormones and chaos and identity issues and life and peers and everything, it's a lot of times where they focus, they go internal to figure it out, and you're trying to drag them out, both in their mind and out of their room, to the world. So, but with time, it usually does, they get more comfortable, and then here they go interacting with others around them. Yeah, very good. I want you to know I'm available after we could talk. Linda Hoffman has my contact info. You can ask anybody and find me. I have some of this info up here, so I'm easy to find, but any resource that you need, I'd be happy to help and connect you in. Yeah, very good. It's been fun. I didn't go heavy on the biblical side because I wanted to focus on tools, but that's my passion also. So if you ever have any questions, just feel free to reach out.